Welcome to this Doctor of Ministry project presentation. My name is Giovanni Arroyo, a doctoral student at Wesley Theological Seminary in the Transformative Leadership in the Wesleyan Perspective track, in partnership with Wesley House in Cambridge, United Kingdom. Thank you for taking the time for viewing this video presentation and submitting your feedback at the end by the Google document that I provided. The topic of my doctoral ministry project is cross-racial and cross-cultural ministry in the Latino context, learning to listen to our stories, Intercultural Competency 101 for the Latino communities. In today's presentation, you will have an understanding of the rationale of my interests in this area, obtain a landscape picture of the current reality of Latino ministry in the United Methodist Church in the United States. Understand that that's the challenge the United Methodist Church must address in regards to a new paradigm shift for supporting cross-racial and cross-cultural Latino pastors and congregations. Be presented with the Wesleyan ecclesiology utilized for this project, explore briefly the biblical and theological framing that highlights the importance of intercultural ministry, understand the theoretical framework that shaped the project, which also provides the operational definition of intercultural competence for this project. You will also obtain an overview of the human-centered design methodology utilized in the inspiration, ideation, and implementation phases of this project. You also hear about the project implementation process, and lastly, explore the findings and learnings gleaned from the project implementation process. So let's begin this quick overview of the doctoral ministry project. The why question. Why did I endeavor in this area of interest? My pastoral ministry began in 2001 when I was appointed to La Iglesia Metodista Unida, El Camino in Norwalk, Connecticut, a Latino congregation in a shared facility ministry setting, which meant in that time understood as a tenant-landlord relationship. The reality was that I was sent to a community of faith that was predominantly Colombian. There was one person in myself who were not from Colombia. The factors at play was that I was from a whole different cultural perspective. Language usage had different meanings and a different experience living in the United States, just to name a few. It was in that first appointment I became keenly aware of the need for appointive cabinets in the United Methodist Church to be informed that language isn't the only factor to consider for Latino ministries. Since 2001, I have served all my ministry journey in what is considered in the church a cross-racial and cross-cultural appointment. According to the Book of Discipline, it is defined as cross-racial and cross-cultural appointments are made as a creative response to increasing racial ethnic diversity in the church and its leadership. Cross-racial and cross-cultural appointments of clergy persons to congregations in which the majority of their constituencies are different from the clergy person's own racial, ethnic, and cultural background. Annual conferences shall prepare clergy and congregations for cross-racial and cross-cultural ministries appointments. When such appointments are made, bishops, cabinets, and boards of ordained ministry shall provide specific training for the clergy persons so appointed and for their congregations. For the past decade, I have been serving in the General Commission on Religion and Race, and I'm currently overseeing all the programmatic work of this agency worldwide. Part of my area of focus and interest has been developing clergy and laity in being more interculturally competent as they engage ministry in a multicultural society. As I continue to lead within the Latino context and serve the global church, I saw these two gifts intersecting in a way that shaped this project. The growth of the Latino churches in the United States is due to the role religion has played in communal life. Authors Martinez and Tamburello indicate that Latinos as an ethno-racial minority group in the United States typically report a higher level of religiosity than most other ethno-racial groups in the United States. And Latino congregations play a vital role in the lives of their members. The church plays an essential role in the community by addressing the social ills that continue to impact the livelihood of Latinos. For example, poverty, immigration, and education are all influenced by the systemic racism that continues to discriminate against the community. Latino churches provides venues so that community organizing, as well as a sense of empowerment, can become tools for combating the effects of these and other social ills. Within United Methodism, Latino ministries have to some extent incorporated a social justice ministry model that seeks to live out our Wesleyan understanding of social holiness. A dominant approach for Latino ministry in the United Methodist Church has been as an immigrant church model that primarily reaches out to first-generation Latinos and recent arrivals. Spanish is the dominant language in this model, which often focusing on assisting integration into the wider community through English as second language classes, and as well providing educational programs on rights and how to address any immigration status concerns. Much of the programming within this model focuses on serving community needs, a social holiness perspective. However, this model of ministry is limited when we study the mission field. The reality is that the current approach to Latino ministry serves a smaller segment of the Latino population that currently resides in the United States, first generation, non-US born. United Methodist churches in the United States are experiencing the challenge of connecting and being in ministry with the growing Latino presence. Research indicates that by 2030, half of Latinos in America will be Protestant. The Pew Research Center data indicates that in 2017, 67% of Latinos residing in the United States were US born, while 33% were foreign born, and approximately 2-to-1 ratio. An important difference between the two is that foreign-born Latinos in general tend to marry within their ethnic and racial group. However, this is not true of Latinos in the United States. According to the National Plan for Hispanic Latino Ministries, a higher proportion of United States Hispanics Latinos are part of interracial or interethnic couples than any other US ethnic group. This demographic reality impacts how we should shift Latino ministry from a homogeneous understanding towards a multicultural perspective and approach to ministry. The dominant approach of grouping Latinos based on linguistic understanding undermines the cross-racial and cross-cultural reality of serving in this ministry setting. In order for a new movement to occur within the church for Latino ministries, the National Plan for Hispanic Latino Ministries of the United Methodist Church hosted the third national consultation in 2015. This consultation brought together key leaders and innovative thinkers across the United Methodist Church to build a better understanding of the rich and diverse future we can create together for the relevancy of ministry. These recommendations challenge the perspective of the United Methodist Church not to view Latino ministries not as a homogeneous group, but from a multicultural and cross-cultural understanding. This project aligns with recommendation 2, 4, and 6 in regards to cultural competency, valuing the gifts that Latinos bring to the church, and investing in intercultural and multicultural ministry. As a denomination, the United Methodist Church faces a new wave of cross-racial and cross-cultural appointments, which causes appointive cabinets to take time to consider how to best identify and support these ministry settings. The question that must be posed, as we imagine cross-racial and cross-cultural ministry settings, is what does it have to do with Latino ministries? I argue that Latino ministries in the United States are built on a cross-racial and cross-cultural DNA due to the complexities of cultural and ethnic realities present within the Latino population. For this reason, Latino ministries are also a cross-racial, cross-cultural ministry setting. The nature of Latino congregations is multicultural. Thus, pastoral leadership must be able to navigate the diverse cultural realities that hinder and impact the ministry efforts. I contend that the denomination has not been able to understand the complexity of Latino ministry because it has viewed it from a linguistic grouping rather than a multicultural reality requiring the assessment of appointments through the lenses of cross-racial, cross-cultural ministry. To begin to reshape, rethink, appointive cabinets' ways of discerning cross-racial and cross-cultural appointments, we must consider a three-pronged approach that emphasizes a Wesleyan ecclesiology: orthodoxy, orthopraxy, and orthopathy. Appointed cabinets, in order to move towards a healthy model for cross-racial, cross-cultural appointments, must begin by creating a vision that articulates how open itinerancy is one of our gifts to the mission field, as it allows for us to be bridge builders among differences. A recommendation for creating a communal understanding of open itinerancy in cross-cultural ministry settings is claiming our belief as a church about this connectional gift. The message of open itinerancy must be heard beyond the confines of the first announcement of appointments of the season, and it must be shared continuously as we continue to look at the relevancy of our mission field. It is a message that Latino ministry leaders must articulate consistently so that there is an awareness and understanding of how pastors are sent people in the United Methodist Church by the bishop. Open itinerancy is the way the appointive cabinet discerns how to build the kingdom of God here on earth. By readdressing and reclaiming our Wesleyan theology of open itinerancy, the appointive cabinet can move forward towards a more healthy practice and a healthy process for appointing CRCC pastors. So, what should be the appointive cabinet's orthopraxis? The appointed cabinet should and must move beyond talking about what we believe and move towards corrective actions that will avoid the continued challenges and the lack of successful and flourishing cross-racial and cross-cultural appointment matches. This will require cabinets to reimagine the complexities of Latino ministries within the context of their mission area. If appointments are to be made through the celebration of the diversity of gifts matched with missional needs, as done by Wesley in the early church, then appointment cabinets must engage in a proactive approach in understanding, assessing, and determining cross-racial, cross-cultural ministry settings. Cabinets must be able to send pastors that can navigate cultural differences within the congregation and the mission field to which they have been appointed. Lastly, the orthopathy is the developing intentional cross-racial, cross-cultural training and skills for potential pastors that will begin to address the systemic obstacles currently faced by cross-racial, cross-cultural ministry. By reclaiming a Wesleyan ecclesiology approach, we create a new cultural paradigm for appointive cabinets in how we view and engage in this type of ministry. The time has arrived for the church to try a new way forward so that we can connect with great racial and cultural diversity in the Latino context. As the United Methodist Church strives to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, it is evident that there is a need for intentional preparation for lay and clergy serving in this multicultural, multi-ethnic, and intercultural ministry reality. This project was developed to address the gap that currently exists in preparing Latino leaders to serve across cultural differences in order to flourish in their cross-racial, cross-cultural ministries. The United Methodist Church is faced with the reality that we must understand the diversity of God's creation as a gift. Ed Stretzer succinctly articulates, a church is not primarily responsible for how multicultural its neighborhood is, but it's responsible for how kingdom-minded it is. What is our understanding of diversity? So what does it look like to make a healthy cultural shift away from who you are to who you can be? Within the Latino context, it is evident that as a cross-cultural pastor, one must be informed by the various cultural contexts that exist in the faith community and the mission field surrounding that community. For it impacts our theological discourse as well as our praxis. It is therefore important to engage with biblical narrative of the creation story found in Genesis chapter 1 to understand how culture is a gift to us. Within my theological chapter, I explored Wesley's understanding of the Imago Dei. What I want to highlight in regards to the creation narrative is that the creation story reminds us of the importance of seeking and sustaining relationships with all of God's creation. The author, McGrath, invokes this notion in stating, humanity is created as a social being. It's meant to exist in relation with others. God does not hinder relationships. but seeks to be in a genuine and loving relationship with humanity and desires humanity to be in relationship with each other. If we are to claim Imago Dei, we must not create statutes of limitation of God's good creation of us in the Creator's image. God created all of us in the diversity of our abilities, cultures, ethnicities, and races. God created all of us in the diversity of our genders and sexualities. This is the gift of God to humanity. However, many times within the perspective of the church, we limit our missional work to only be in relationship with the humanity that looks, acts, thinks, values, and even behaves as we do. We fall to the temptation of defining standards based on our worldview, which distorts the fullness of God's Imago Dei in the world. It is important to recognize that the creation narrative, we are able to identify elements of social organization that anthropologists label as culture. Even in the creation of two individuals, they needed culture, shared understandings, and ways of life that would allow them to thrive as human beings. We are able to see that culture is created as a context for human flourishing, so that we may work towards its redemption and enjoy its goodness. The way we experience culture has been impacted by sin. However, it is part of the creative order for us to flourish in our human relationships and in our relationship with the creative order in order to be the church of Christ that welcomes and embraces God's creation. There must be a paradigm shift in how we are in relationship with one another to create a culture of welcome and not of tolerance, a culture of mutual respect in the midst of any differences in ambiguity we might experience. It also charges us to see the image of God in the other, who might challenge our views and our perceptions of the world. This is what cross-racial and cross-cultural ministry allows the church to experience and live out theologically in the world. Culture is ever present. You cannot not have a culture. Your culture is an aspect of your humanity. We are going to see the full humanity of each person. We as a church must be then willing to see the culture that is constantly shaping behaviors and values. And so, as we look at culture, we also must look at the Pentecost narrative. The Pentecost narrative is traditionally understood as the birth of the body of Christ. And this narrative broadens the scope of what defines the body of Christ. The Pentecost experience shapes and reimagines what Christian community is and should be. The pouring of the Holy Spirit through the movement of the winds and the movement of the view of fire and the sounds of multiple languages ignited the early church movement that pushed against the boundaries existing at that time, so that the gospel could be preached to all. The church celebrates Pentecost as the pouring of the Holy Spirit to the world, represented in multiple entities that were present in that festival of Pentecost. For God's ultimate community is composed of transnational, trans-tribal, transracial, and translinguistic people. The Pentecost experience creates the pathway to fulfill the vision of John of Patmos. After this, I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. The Pentecost experience is one that teaches us to be diverse and inclusive. The Pentecost narrative challenges this current status quo of how ministry is to be experienced. Brandon Green articulates, in Acts 2, we get a vision of a beautiful community of diversity, reciprocity, and interdependence. We get to see folks hearing the gospel in their own tongues. We get to see the church as it could be, or better yet, as it should be. In order to provide clarity to this distinction, biblical scholars have seen the Pentecost experience as the undoing of the Tower of Babel account in Genesis 11, in which God introduced diverse language, resulting in the dispersion of humanity. This account has been viewed as the separation of the people into particular communities throughout the land, while the Pentecost experience considers the body across the multiple communities that make up society and unites them in Jerusalem by allowing the crossing of language barriers. It is important to acknowledge that Pentecost is not a total reversal of Genesis 11, because God did not give everyone the same language at Pentecost. Instead, unique languages were preserved as everyone hears the same message. This indicates that God celebrates unity amidst blessed diversity. This distinction, to a certain level, correlates with the current practices of the church. Historically, the United Methodist Church has been created based on similarities and commonalities within particular groups of people, often being determined by racial and ethnic compositions. Many of our churches live that way. This is the Tower of Babel approach to ministry, an ethnocentric orientation rather than an ethno-relative orientation into which we are invited by Acts 2. This scriptural understanding also requires us to struggle with the following questions. What do we mean by multicultural ministry? And what is it that is the end goal? Is diversity what we're aiming for? Or is inclusion greater than diversity? Is there a difference between diversity and inclusion? The Acts 2 church distinctively highlights the intentionality of the gospel reaching every community without exception. It provides a framing for the early church that envisions an intentional intercultural community. We must be cautioned that the model church of Acts is beyond being multicultural and is intercultural. There's an important distinction we must be attentive to if we are to be a church ready to engage in bridge building among the multiple cultural realities we are part of. The Pentecost story begins to push the early church to work with a difference present and break away from a monocultural mindset toward an intercultural one. The Pentecost narrative helps to understand that the multicultural model is composed of diverse cultural and ethnic communities that live alongside one another. However, the limitations of a multicultural ministry model is that the components of a community do not need to engage in deep interactions with each other. Within this approach to ministry, representation is achieved and diversity is acknowledged, but inclusion might not be experienced. The image in your screens demonstrates the interaction one experiences in a multicultural church. The intercultural adapted church has a deep appreciation, understanding, and respect for other cultures. The community is self-aware of their cultural norms, practices, and beliefs, and they're able to explore those of another culture, which allows them to generally build bridges across differences and incorporate practices and behaviors that reflect different cultural groups. This is the motto of Acts 2 Church, which we are invited to strive for. The Pentecost narrative challenges our discourse of the church in regards to diversity and inclusion, directly influencing that which defines an intercultural community. The challenge for most of our congregations involves not lack of desire of diversity and inclusion, but rather a resistance to make the changes needed to foster diversity and inclusion. The orthodoxy of the church recognizes that the divine existence of the other is part of God's gift to us in creation. It continues to acknowledge the role of our histories, traditions, and experiences have in our Christian formation and expression of Christian faith. Likewise, the Pentecost narrative challenges us and charges us to be an intercultural community, one acknowledging diversity beyond representational model, and one that does not simply stay in the proximity of diversity, but interacts within it to be a community of inclusion and acceptance. The Pentecost narrative pushes us to struggle with another element of our theological discourse that supports the why of being an intercultural church and our understanding of cross-racial, cross-cultural ministry as orthodoxy, orthopraxy, and orthopathy. The goal of this project is to create a curriculum that provides Latino leaders a biblical and theological framework for intercultural ministry within the Latino context. The curriculum will expand this exegetical understanding of the creation and Pentecost narratives as one that elaborates the important roles of relationships, culture, and community that we must seek to have in the mission field in the United States. This curriculum will allow lay and clergy to have a foundational knowledge, skills, experiences of intercultural competencies that impact their CRCC cross-racial, cross-cultural ministry. As the spiritual narrative challenges the understanding of ministry models from a homogeneous towards an intercultural reality, there must be intentional steps taken to equip lay and clergy to live out the missional call in a global context. So this project developed a curriculum articulating a theological paradigm shift towards an intercultural understanding of ministerial engagement within the cross-racial, cross-cultural reality in Latino ministries. The definition of intercultural competence is more complex than a simple definition of culture and competence. And for the purposes of this project, two definitions were influenced the design and the pedagogical approach of the curriculum. They're similar, but they provide different lenses through which to understand and attain intercultural competence. The first, from Janet M. Bennett, defines it as a set of cognitive, affective, and behavioral skills and characteristics that support effective and appropriate interactions in a variety of cultural contexts. The second definition, from Milton R. Hammer, describes intercultural competence as the capability to shift cultural perspective and adapt or bridge behavior to cultural commonality and differences. Intercultural competence development focuses on eliminating interpretations and behaviors based on bias and stereotypes, as well as increasing interpretations and behavior based on cultural generalization frameworks. Hammer articulates that the cultural generalizations or frameworks encourage a deeper inquiry about the experience of the other and result greater understanding and more authentic adaptation to cultural differences and commonalities. The image in the screen is a visual interpretation of the journey of becoming and being an intercultural competent person. Bennett's and Hammer's definitions highlight that the journey of intercultural competence is one that starts with self-awareness. There must be an intentional, deep self-awareness praxis that we must partake in as individuals in order to understand our worldviews have been informed, how our worldviews have been informed and shaped and have led to biases and stereotypes that inform our behaviors towards difference. Bennett's and Milton's definitions of intercultural competence imply having the appropriate attitudes needed to appreciate and be open and flexible to difference in various forms of cultural diversity. For use in the curriculum, the following areas of consideration were envisioned: immediacy of an acute self-awareness, or the ability to be aware of the values, those values, attitudes, and assumptions that inform one's perspective and behaviors, some degree of cultural knowledge in a variety of cultural environments, and the capacity to communicate across cultural differences, and the ability to cultivate meaningful social relationships across cultural and different groups. And so these elements were in the design and creation process of this curriculum. It's important to remember that intercultural competence development is a lifelong process that one must engage continuously as a culture evolves with time. And so one of the things that was very instrumental for this project was how we understand how we interact and practice intercultural competency. And so the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity is based on meaning-making models of cognitive psychology and radical constructivism, which provides a framework that helps one understand the movement from a minimizing approach of difference towards a acceptance and adaptive mindset towards difference. The DMIS, the Developmental Model of Intercultural Sensitivity, provides us a perspective, a empirical-based research analysis of how we may move from an ethnocentric to ethno-relative behavior. The model, as you may see in the screen, has 5 orientations that we could be in. I will not engage in explaining each of the orientations. However, the intercultural competency theoretical framework was the foundation in the design and development of this curriculum. And so as we thought about this theoretical framework, we considered what orientation we will come and lens will come inform our curriculum. We utilize the minimization orientation as the lens by which the curriculum will focus as an entry point for developing a cultural competency awareness. It is in that minimization stage orientation that people create this sense of curiosity. And this orientation provides a lens of the types of learning engagements people should be participating in, which impacts how the lessons were written and facilitated. The design and development of the curriculum utilize a human-centered design methodology. It was utilized as a way to bring in the people who is the end user of the curriculum to provide their input and provide their innovative thoughts into the process. Human-centered design is also known as design thinking, and it has three phases by which this project lived out: inspiration, learning from the people and the community I was designing this curriculum for, and think about the creative possibilities as they evolved on this phase. The ideation stage, which is brainstorming, analyzing the data obtained, identifying possible design opportunities for the curriculum and some solutions that we could actually consider in the creation, and actually then develop the curriculum. And lastly, the implementation phase, where we had a pilot of the curriculum to see how it will be received and how it had an impact in people's understanding of intercultural competence. The human-centered design methodology, is an agile approach for design thinking in the event that was useful in this project. It allowed for the flexibility of continuously considering different ways that the curriculum can be presented to Latinos in the Latino context. The overall goal of this project were to develop and produce a training curriculum in Spanish that could also be contextualized in English and Portuguese. To test the curriculum with a group of 8 to 10 Latino leaders representing the 5 jurisdictions of the United Methodist Church in the United States, as well as Puerto Rico, and to revise the resource and make needed adaptation to reflect the diverse context of Latino ministries. As part of the learning from people directly involved in Latino ministries, it's part of the inspiration phase of this project, where we gathered and identified those individuals who are actively in ministry in the Latino context, or those who provide resources and training to Latinos in their ministry. We invited them to be part of a 2-day consultation that was designed to review the available material of intercultural competency and to provide feedback on how it could be used within Latino ministries, as well as to identify materials that should be contextualized and or created. Part of the inspiration phase is exploring with people who will be served the possibilities of how to respond to their needs. It was important that this phase, we had that cross-section of voices present, for it is important in a human-centered design approach that we hear directly from the communities you're looking to serve. But in order to maximize our 2-day approach of the consultation, we decided to do a pre-consultation survey on intercultural competence of the participants who were coming to the 2-day consultation. And the purpose of the survey was to capture the initial thoughts that would shape the design of the curriculum process. So the survey was to figure out the different aspects that would inform the pedagogical and actual framework of the curriculum. The survey results were viewed as non-binding, but as parameters to consider in the curriculum design. And the questions focused on 6 overarching themes: Latino context, content, types of learning engagements, the types of the different presentation formats that might be helpful in this community, categories for content framework, and non-negotiables for the curriculum. And the survey provided a baseline of where people initial thoughts were and how they would influence as well as shape the consultation conversations. We had invited 9 participants to this consultation. 6 of them completed the survey. The survey provided important insights regarding some of the considerations that must be accounted for in the consultation. And some of the insights formulated in the review of the survey data provided were: there's a spectrum of how people might define intercultural competency. In order to determine a common baseline understanding of what intercultural competency is and how it impacts our development, our relationship with the other, we understood that participants were provided with different arrays of understanding. And so that shaped how we had to provide an operational definition and understanding of what that meant. The survey also had a question and used the term Latinx throughout its questions, which is the latest term being utilized in academia, which we made the assumption people would understand and support. However, it was interesting to obtain that the results of the project was that the term Latino was more preferable term within the United Methodist Church than Latinx. The other learning that was captured through the survey was the level of expertise of the respondents influenced the expected level of curriculum design, which made the assumption that the participants in the curriculum have a greater awareness and knowledge of intercultural competence. So due to the various experiences of the respondents in leading or teaching skills associated with intercultural competency, it was apparent that it was necessary to keep the human-centered design model and mindset that collectively we will be able to determine an innovative curriculum for the church. And that we all who came to that consultation were bringing expertise, and that no one, not me, was the only expert in the room. So that led to the consultation process where the goal was to collectively engage in the design thinking process that would help imagine a different type of curriculum for Latino churches that will become an entry point of learning intercultural competency. At that consultation, various human-centered design exercises with the community was used so that ideas could converge, and the first iteration of the curriculum design came out. During that 2-day consultation, we used different methods that human-centered design processes incorporate. And those were interviewing, concept mapping, which is really about depicting the relationship between various concepts that people had identified, visualizing the vote, which was a challenge because there were so many ideas. And so how do we process the multiple options and really have alignment of what is possible at this time? And then really defining using important difficult matrix, what are things that we are able to do and what things will take longer. Uh, these processes helped us to really go from a macro to a micro level in curriculum development. Within the Latino community, we noticed that some of the non-negotiables for the curriculum was the importance of family, because it is part of a collective mindset that had to be expressed by the curriculum experience. Such a mindset is connected to a relationship-focused approach that seeks deeper understanding of the other, rather than a focus on tasks that must be accomplished to meet curriculum goals, which does not allow time for authentic relationship to form or deepen. The other thing that was very clear that will be a non-negotiable for this curriculum, it was that it had to be intergenerational learning, because there is generational differences in reality in the Latino ministry. And so that also meant that the curriculum would be made available in Spanish, Portuguese, and English to ensure that the 1.5 and the 2 second generation Latinos are part of this experience in this curriculum, and that there will be intentional community learning experiences that allow for 1.5 and second and third generations to be part of that learning. And that shaped the pedagogical in the facilitation format of this curriculum. The identified non-negotiables informed the content framework as we think about relationship focus, about family, and intergenerational learning. And so each lesson was framed as a journey that people would have. And that journey will include a biblical and theological foundation regarding the lesson theme, an introductory story allowing the concept to be presented and framed contextually to the US Latino experience. Then there will be a primary lesson content to be taught, a self-awareness activity focusing on the goals and essential elements of being an intercultural competent leader, tools that reinforce the content and also created the opportunity to develop a skill set, a commitment requiring participants to continue the self-work in between lessons, and that every lesson have a closing exercise shaped around worship or ritual. This content framework approach intersected with the multiple ideas generated by the consultation that were identified as important for the experience. The challenge for the design of the curriculum was how to incorporate all these elements of the framework to an hour-and-a-half lesson, which is considered in the ideation phase. The first ideation came out of that consultation, which led us to further researching and gathering data about elements of that curriculum and what will be feasible as an introductory level curriculum. Multiple meetings were led with the National Plan for Hispanic Latino Ministries and the General Board of Discipleship, who were my co-sponsors in funding this project and also assisting in program management in connecting and making the implementation phase feasible and possible. It was in those multiple different conversations with key leaders and people who are serving in Latino context that the curriculum continued to take shape and reshaping to have a more effective lesson for the audiences that we're intending to reach. So it was evident that we had to separate one of the areas of interest, which was what is culture, and take that lesson and break into 2 lessons. what is culture visible and what is culture invisible in order to provide more learning engagement for that lesson. It was also important for us to take into a third ideation and was to think about the non-negotiable about family. And the third ideation was recognizing Eric Law's work on multicultural communities and his respectful communication guidelines as a ground rule for groups having diverse conversations. And in light of his work in the non-negotiables of the concept of familia, it was agreed to create a guiding principles of how community will be experienced together as participants journey through each lesson using the acronym familia for our grounding principles. And so I developed familia as a grounding principle that we agree that we will continue to live out in our lessons. In light of preparing people for the first lesson, an overall message of the curriculum of intercultural competency, another element was created was to provide a intercultural competency self-assessment checklist as a pre-assessment before the first lesson for participants. This assessment was adapted from the Greater Vancouver Island Multicultural Society, which supports the theoretical framework of this project. After many ideation processes, it was determined that we will test 2 lessons before considering the development of what culture is visible and what culture is invisible lessons. The slide that you see before you just provides you a high-level outline for the decisions made in regards to the different elements for each part of the curriculum framework for the pilot lessons that we did in the implementation process. We brought together a cross-section of 20 leaders across the 5 jurisdictions of the United Methodist Church in Puerto Rico to pilot this curriculum, which was our implementation phase. It occurred in Philadelphia before the National Marcha meeting, which is the Hispanic Caucus of the United Methodist Church. And the primary purpose of this was to pilot our curriculum and to see what was the feedback of what could be improved to contextualize the work. We decided to have 2 cohorts for the purpose of using these generational realities and obtain their feedback regarding the learning engagements from their lens. And so that we could then revise what was more appropriate to reach 1.5 second generation or first generation Latinos. The overall goal of that was to really hear from the participants what worked, what didn't work, what could be improved, what was great, and then incorporate that feedback in the final revision of the curriculum. And so the feedback process that we utilized was also a human-centered design technique called Rose, Thorn, Bud, a technique for identifying things as positive, negative, or having potential. And this technique was provided each participant of the 2 cohorts to use Post-it notes in 3 different colors and to then answer the questions: what went well, what can be improved, where do you see opportunities? In order to avoid any bias in terms of me as a facilitator, another person from the General Board Discipleship led the feedback session so that they would be able to be free to share their experience. What went well was highlighted on that there was a high level of the facilitation skills was so important in their experience, and that worked well. They enjoyed that the curriculum allowed dialogue and included involvement of all the participants. They appreciated the diversity of methods in the lesson, from video to styads to full groups to individual time. And they also celebrated the contextualization of the content to the Latino experience. What can be improved was that the curriculum needed more time. The goal was an hour and a half for each lesson, and they felt that they didn't have enough time to really go to the experience as it was intended to be. And it was also interesting that there was feedback regarding uses of more images in the curriculum, more visual images. Especially this feedback came from second and third generation cohort, while the first and 1.5 generation cohort did not identify this as a need for more improvement. So that was something for us to consider in layout design. What were the opportunities? The opportunities was filled with multiple ideas of how this curriculum could be utilized throughout the United Methodist connection beyond cross-racial, cross-cultural, and Latino ministry. This group saw value of this curriculum as an online course, as part of the yearly local church training, as a resource that could be provided and contextualized for white constituents, because there was a lot of sharing that these are the people in positions of power that impact the development of Latino ministries in the United Methodist Church. So they also need to have the same skills and have self-awareness in how they engage and make decisions that impact Latino ministries. The learnings. The curriculum emphasized that our biblical interpretation is shaped by our world perspective, which is influenced by our cultural reality. In order for us to continue to expand theological discourse, we must understand who we are as cultural beings. It is in this exploration of who we are and how it impacts how we engage with one another that this introductory curriculum aims to lead participants. In order for us to be intercultural adapted church, the Pentecost narrative highlights, there must be processes that help us explore our understanding of self and other. This curriculum connects participants with Imago Dei so they could understand the importance of relationship with each other. And so one of the challenges in the curriculum development and the learnings was that as we thought about methodology and emerge in the reality of how to create the curriculum, it was important not to have a one definite way of creating this curriculum. One of the learning was the evolution and agile process allowed us to go from what we thought was the original first ideation perspective of the curriculum. It turned out later on to a whole different curriculum, which then allow us to engage with each other and be able to understand that learning engagements for people may be different at different levels. And so it was important for us to disrupt and reimagine how we thought about curriculum development in this process. The feedback of the cohorts in regards to the lessons requiring more time led to the decision that the quality and the content created should not be diluted to meet an hour and a half time frame. The curriculum will be integrated as an intercultural competence module for certified lit ministers within the National Plan for Hispanic Latinos Ministries. It will also be utilized by the National Plan for Hispanic Latino Ministries as an encounter curriculum for lay missioners. A facilitator's manual will be developed so there is consistency and key objectives are achieved The manual will be developed also in English and Spanish, so the trainers have the ability to code switch if needed when with the proper terminology. There is right now um, a plan to develop a Sunday school or small group curriculum focused on intercultural competency through the biblical and theological discourse. This will allow strengthening the biblical interpretation in local congregations in order to have greater openness for deeper development of skills in intercultural competency. And the primary theme for the curriculum suggested thus far is our story, your story, God's story, which will align with the intercultural competency journey and definition, self-awareness, other awareness, bridging. It is also recommended that there be an exploration of development of online course, providing didactical experience as the face-to-face curriculum. Making this curriculum available online will provide an opportunity for those Latino leaders that are overwhelmed with other work schedules to do this at a distance, at a time of their convenience, rather than in a time frame that interrupts their day-to-day work schedules. This project is just a step towards addressing the complexity of Latino ministries within a dominant white denomination that does not fully recognize its diversity. This curriculum has been formed to address the gap that exists in equipping leaders to move into the realm of cross-racial, cross-cultural within the Latino context. Education equips people with knowledge that allows for new perspectives to be considered. Learning to listen to our stories, Intercultural Competency 101 in the Latino context is the beginning of the journey of supporting leaders in building relationships across the commonalities and differences existing in the community. This is a new beginning for United Methodism in the Latino context. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation. A lot has been shared, and I tried my best to keep it from all the research that this work took. Your feedback is welcome at this time. Please utilize the link I sent you and complete that survey as soon as possible. My friends, stay healthy and safe, and have a blessed day. Thank you.